When Maggie Baugh finally broke her silence, it wasn't with words, it was with a black square. No caption, no explanation. Just a short message that said, "Announcement coming soon." To most, it looked like a simple teaser. But to those following the whirlwind surrounding Keith Urban's recent divorce from Nicole Kidman, it felt like the quiet sound before a storm. For months, whispers had followed both of them, the country superstar who had built a career on vulnerability and charm, and the young guitarist who had become an unexpected fixture in his band. Their on-stage chemistry, fans said, was undeniable. The way they moved, the way their music seemed to talk to each other between chords, it was the kind of magic that didn't need explaining. But when the headlines of Urban's divorce hit, that magic suddenly looked different. What had once been seen as artistic energy now carried the weight of speculation. And in an era where every glance can turn into a headline, silence becomes its own form of confession. So when Maggie Baugh, 25 years old and still rising fast through Nashville's ranks, decided to speak without speaking, the internet noticed. "The devil win," she teased. A song about temptation, emotion, and the battle between desire and discipline. A song about knowing exactly what you want and walking away from it. It wasn't lost on anyone that the timing felt deliberate. The lyrics of the song hit harder than most breakup tracks. They sounded like something deeper, like someone trying to tell the truth without naming names. And as that haunting line echoed, fans started asking the question nobody wanted to say out loud. Was this about Keith Urban? Reports suggest that since his split from Kidman, Urban has been spending more time in the studio, often alongside Baugh. Insiders describe the two as professionally close, bound by a mutual respect for music. But social media has its own rhythm, one that dances to speculation, not facts. And when Urban changed the lyrics to his Kidman-inspired song The Fighter during a Chicago concert and started singing, the internet didn't just listen. It exploded. Was it a simple shout-out to his bandmate? Or something more personal wrapped in melody? Nobody knew. But before that, hit like and subscribe so that you will never miss any future update. As one chapter in Keith Urban's life closed, it seemed another was beginning. And whether it was a love story, a musical bond, or just two artists caught in the same storm, it had everyone watching. Because in the world of country music, silence rarely lasts long. And when it breaks, it tends to echo. But to understand this silence, and what might be behind it, you have to look at how Keith Urban got here in the first place. Keith Urban's story has always sounded like a song, the kind that starts soft, rises into triumph, then trembles just enough to remind you that even glory has a breaking point. For decades, he was the golden boy of country music, charming, polished, and endlessly grateful. The man who could turn heartbreak into poetry, who smiled even when the weight of his own expectations pressed hard on his chest. But behind the polished performances and picture-perfect marriage to Nicole Kidman, there were fractures, quiet ones, hidden beneath applause and awards. Rumors had followed their relationship for years. Some claimed distance was the culprit. Two careers built on separate continents, rarely in sync. Others said it was the inevitable toll of a love story lived entirely in public. Whatever the truth was, those who knew Keith best saw something shifting long before the divorce announcement. He began writing darker, more introspective songs. His interviews grew shorter. His eyes, though still kind, seemed tired. There was a storm brewing inside a man who'd spent his whole life learning how to make pain sound beautiful. By the time news of the divorce broke, fans were shocked, but not entirely surprised. The official statements were calm, respectful, and carefully worded, but music tells what press releases can't. And it didn't take long for listeners to notice the change in tone. Songs once filled with gratitude began to hint at regret. Hopeful lyrics gave way to self-reflection. And then came the performances, small gestures that seemed to carry big meaning. The Chicago concert. The name change mid-song. The moment his voice cracked slightly when he said Maggie instead of baby. The world noticed, and so did Maggie. Her decision to post that black square wasn't random, it was rhythm. The timing felt poetic, like an echo to the lyric he'd just changed. Whether intentional or not, it made everyone wonder. What story were they both telling without saying it out loud? Behind the scenes, sources close to both insist it's just music, a mentor and his protege, nothing more. But in an industry built on feelings, perception can become its own truth. And as the song "The Devil Win" teased the idea of resisting temptation, fans couldn't help but read between the lines. Maybe it wasn't about Keith. Maybe it wasn't about love. Maybe it was about the fine line between passion and destruction, the same line Urban himself had been walking his entire career. Whatever it was, one thing was certain. This wasn't the same Keith Urban the world had known for 20 years. The man who once sang about holding on was now learning how to let go. But as the music grew heavier, so did the attention. And the story everyone thought they understood started to twist in ways nobody saw coming. And that's where the spark really caught fire. With one lyric, one name, and one crowd that couldn't believe what it just heard. At that Chicago concert, Keith Urban didn't make a speech or address the rumors. He simply performed. But halfway through "The Fighter," a song long believed to have been inspired by his former marriage, he changed the lyric. Instead of, "When they're trying to get to you, baby, I'll be the fighter," he sang, "When they're trying to get to you, Maggie, I'll be your guitar player." It was playful, spontaneous, and maybe even innocent. But the audience gasped. Phones lifted. Cameras rolled. And before the encore was over, the moment was everywhere. Clips of that performance spread faster than wildfire. Some fans called it sweet, others called it strange. The internet, as it always does, filled in the blanks that the music left open. Within hours, theories multiplied. Some claimed it was a friendly nod to his touring guitarist. Others wondered if it was something deeper. But while headlines speculated, Keith said nothing. Maggie stayed silent too, which only fueled the mystery. The next day, the "Devil Win" teaser appeared on her feed. Same timing, same energy, and maybe the same story told from another side. Was it coincidence, connection, or clever marketing? No one knew. But suddenly, two artists were linked by one lyric, and the entire industry was listening. Still, those close to Urban described him as focused, steady, and in creative overdrive. Rumors may have swirled, but inside the studio the mood was different, intense, quiet, and oddly peaceful. Because for Keith, music had always been the only place he could tell the truth without saying a word. But while he retreated into sound, the world outside grew louder, and so did the questions he could no longer ignore. The noise of speculation can drown even the clearest melody. By October, every appearance, every smile, every glance between Keith and Maggie was analyzed frame by frame. The stage, once his sanctuary, became a magnifying glass. Reporters started circling. Fans dissected set lists and Instagram posts like clues in a mystery novel. Was this duet a message? Was that lyric a confession? The frenzy was endless. And through it all, Keith remained calm. Maybe too calm. People who'd worked with him for years said he'd learned how to turn pain into performance. Every song on stage carried a layer of emotion that felt real but never revealed too much. That's the thing about Keith Urban. He's always been a man who speaks through sound, not statements. Meanwhile, Maggie handled the pressure with surprising grace. No denials, no defenses, just the work. Her live clips showed her pouring everything into her guitar, into her lyrics, as if the music itself were the only response she was willing to give. And maybe that's why the story resonated so deeply. Two artists walking through the storm, refusing to let anyone else define what their silence meant. But silence, in the entertainment world, is never truly silent. When the rumor mill couldn't find new evidence, it built its own. Blog posts speculated about hidden meanings. Anonymous sources claimed inside knowledge. And yet, neither of them broke. Instead, Keith started teasing new material. Darker, slower, full of reflection. Songs that sounded less like heartbreak and more like acceptance. Fans said it felt like he was writing his way through something. Something personal. Something unfinished. And as the world kept guessing, both he and Maggie seemed to be speaking in the only language they trusted, music. The world didn't need words to sense that something was shifting. It was in the air, that quiet tension that hangs just before a storm breaks. Keith Urban, who once filled arenas with anthems of love and redemption, had grown quieter in interviews, his smile more careful, his eyes more reflective. For the first time in decades, it wasn't the music doing the talking. It was the silence between the songs. After the news of his split with Nicole Kidman made its slow, solemn descent across every headline, fans didn't hear from him for weeks. No statements, no clarifications, just the image of a man who looked both lighter and lonelier at once. He kept playing shows because music was still his refuge, but those who watched closely noticed it. The pause before he sang, the deeper breath between verses, the way his voice seemed to tremble when the lyrics cut too close to the truth. And then there was Maggie Baugh. She wasn't the story at first, just the talented young guitarist who had joined his band, a spark of energy with her violin and voice, a rising star who matched his rhythm on stage. But when she posted that black square on Instagram captioned simply, "Announcement coming soon," the internet caught fire. It wasn't just a post, it was an ignition. The kind of silence that speaks in 1,000 interpretations. Some called it marketing, others called it a message. Then came the teaser for her song, "The Devil Win," a haunting melody wrapped in restraint. Her voice cracked softly as she sang. The lyrics felt like confession and defiance intertwined. They didn't confirm anything, but they didn't deny it either. And in that gray space, the world began to write its own story. For Keith, who had spent years learning how to live honestly, this was another kind of reckoning. He knew what rumor could do. He had lived through headlines that twisted truth into theater. But now, standing on the other side of heartbreak, he no longer chased control. He understood that the world would believe what it wanted to. What mattered was the song, not the noise. At his Chicago show in September, the moment that would echo across social media unfolded almost quietly. The crowd was electric, the lights sharp and golden, the air humming with nostalgia. And then, as the intro to The Fighter began, a song long tied to Nicole, to loyalty, to the promise of staying, something changed. Keith looked over at Maggie, a brief smile, a flicker of something unspoken, respect, perhaps, or shared exhaustion from being under the same relentless spotlight. Then, as the chorus swelled, he changed a single line. The crowd roared. Cameras flashed. Within hours, clips flooded TikTok and Instagram, captions screaming, "Did you hear what he just said?" But beneath the headlines and hashtags, the truth was quieter, heavier. It wasn't flirtation, it was deflection. A moment of human warmth turned into speculation. For a man who had once built his life on transparency, Keith knew better than anyone that sometimes the kindest gesture can become the loudest rumor. Backstage after the show, he didn't scroll through his phone or check what people were saying. He just sat in the dim light of the dressing room, guitar still in his lap, running his thumb along the strings until the noise faded from his mind. He thought about the years, about love, loss, and all the versions of himself he'd outgrown. He thought about how easily people confuse compassion for confession, music for message. For the first time in his long, loud career, Keith Urban didn't try to explain himself. He let the music breathe. Because maybe this, all of it, wasn't about scandal or new beginnings. Maybe it was about growth. The kind that happens when you've already lost, already learned, and no longer need to prove who you are. And somewhere, in a studio across town, Maggie was recording the final vocals for "The Devil Win." Her voice cracked slightly on the last note, not from fatigue, but from truth. Both she and Keith were walking parallel paths, each haunted by the same thing, the weight of being seen but never fully understood. As the final chord faded, the echo lingered, a mix of defiance and redemption. And in that echo, before the storm of gossip could rise again, both artists seemed to find something neither fame nor rumor could touch. Stillness. The kind that doesn't ask for understanding, it simply exists. By November, the line between art and rumor had blurred completely. Every lyric was a clue. every silence an answer. But those who looked closer saw something else taking shape, a quiet evolution. For Keith Urban, this wasn't the chaos of Scandal. It was the calm before reinvention. Friends described him as lighter, more grounded, less guarded than before. The divorce may have closed one era, but it also cracked open space for a new one. He began collaborating with younger artists, not as a mentor trying to control the narrative, but as a musician rediscovering curiosity. Maggie Baugh was one of those collaborators. She wasn't a scandal. She was a symbol of a new chapter, one driven by artistry, not approval. Rumors suggested that some inside his circle worried about how things looked from the outside. But Keith had always been the kind of artist who let the music justify itself. "If the songs tell the truth," he once said, "the rest will follow." And maybe that's exactly what was happening. The truth wasn't in the gossip, it was in the songs. It was in the subtle lyric changes, the shared stages, and the courage to create something despite the noise around them. Because in the end, all great artists learn that reinvention isn't about erasing the past, it's about playing the same chords with a different heart. And that's exactly what Keith Urban seemed to be doing, one performance at a time. When Maggie's full song finally dropped, the internet went wild again. The Devil Win wasn't subtle. It was soulful, wounded, and defiant. Her voice carried both vulnerability and strength, and the lyrics, well, they sounded like the inside of someone wrestling with something real. "I don't know how to heal my soul," she sang, her tone trembling but unbroken. Listeners couldn't help connecting it to the speculation. Was this about temptation, loyalty, or something bigger? But those who really listened caught something else: resilience. It wasn't a confession, it was a declaration. A reminder that even when the world is watching, you still get to choose your own story. Keith Urban, meanwhile, quietly shared the track on his story. No caption, no comment, just support. And that one repost reignited every headline. But maybe that was the point. Maybe it wasn't about what people thought they were seeing, but about what they were meant to feel. Two musicians, each fighting their own battle, finding expression through the same storm. In interviews that followed, Keith spoke vaguely about rebirth, about learning to let go of what no longer serves the soul. It was philosophical, ambiguous, and deeply telling. He didn't need to name names. The meaning was already there between the lines. Because sometimes, the truth doesn't come in statements, it comes in songs. Weeks passed. The noise started to fade, replaced by something quieter, perspective. The gossip blogs moved on, the headlines softened, and what remained was the music itself. Keith Urban emerged not as a man broken by scandal, but as one transformed by experience. His performances carried new warmth. His laughter on stage felt unforced again. The walls between him and the audience seemed thinner, more human. Maggie, too, began to step into her own light. The Devil Win wasn't just a hit. It was a statement of independence. The story people tried to write for her had been rewritten by her own hand. Together or apart, their journeys mirrored the same truth. Every artist eventually faces a choice between silence and authenticity. Both chose the latter. And perhaps that's what drew people to this story from the beginning. Not the rumors, not the drama, but the humanity beneath it all. Two musicians, two souls navigating loss, reinvention, and the price of being seen. Because in the end, the music always outlasts the noise. And when the dust settles, what stays behind isn't scandal, it's song. And as Keith Urban strummed through his final encore that night, there was no need for changed lyrics or coded messages. Just a simple smile, a nod to his guitarist, and the quiet understanding that the real story had already been told, note by note. As the weeks turned into months, the stage lights no longer felt like interrogation lamps. They became beacons again. Keith Urban, once the golden boy turned quiet sage, had found balance between his shadows and his spotlight. He began speaking more openly during shows, not about rumors, but about resilience. About how sometimes life takes away your illusions so you can see what's real. Fans noticed it, the way he carried himself, the calm between songs, the gratitude in his voice. He wasn't trying to prove anything anymore. He was simply being. And Maggie? Her energy shifted too. The silence that once felt tense now felt intentional. Her posts glowed with quiet confidence, rehearsal clips, sunsets, the occasional lyric line that hinted at peace rather than turmoil. Together, they didn't feed the rumors. They starved them. By living their truth publicly but quietly, they let time do the talking. The narrative that had once been chaos began to feel like closure. Because eventually, every storm runs out of thunder, and what's left behind is only what was real to begin with. When Keith hit the studio again, the sound was different. Gone were the polished pop country choruses built for radio perfection. In their place came stripped-down tracks, soft, soulful, unguarded. Each song felt like a conversation with the past. The guitar wasn't screaming anymore, it was whispering. Those close to him said the sessions felt almost spiritual. He'd spend hours tweaking a single note, chasing emotion rather than applause. It wasn't about comeback, it was about clarity. He once said in a quiet interview, "You can't rewrite history, but you can write what comes after." And maybe that's what this whole chapter had become. What comes after? After fame, after heartbreak, after the noise? Meanwhile, Maggie began touring independently. Her music gaining traction not because of association but authenticity. Her live performances carried that same quiet fire, a balance between innocence and experience. Audiences connected with her not because of who she played beside, but because of how she played for herself. Two stories diverging, yet harmonizing from afar. The mentor rediscovering humility, and the student finding her voice. It was less about the past now and more about what music had always been for both of them: survival. The world tends to see celebrity stories as either tragedy or triumph, rarely both. But Keith's story reminded everyone that sometimes the most powerful transformations happen in silence. The lesson wasn't about loss or scandal, it was about what remains when everything else falls away. He began using his platform to speak about emotional healing. Not as a performer preaching perfection, but as a man who'd lived through self-doubt and come out softer, not harder. He told fans, "The hardest addiction to quit is the addiction to control." Those words struck something deep in people who had watched him struggle, recover, love, lose, and rise again. And for Maggie, the lesson was just as profound. She'd stepped into a spotlight she never asked for and turned it into art. Instead of letting rumors define her, she used them to refine her. The Devil Win wasn't about scandal, it was about strength. And in a world that thrives on noise, her refusal to explain herself became its own kind of music. Both artists had faced the fire, and instead of burning, they learned to glow. Because sometimes, what the world calls controversy is really just transformation in disguise. And from that transformation came something more beautiful than either fame or control: freedom. By the time the year wound down, the story had shifted completely. No longer framed by gossip or heartbreak, it had become something larger, a reminder that growth often hides inside endings. Keith Urban's concerts felt like celebrations now, not of chart-topping hits, but of human resilience. When he sang old songs, he did it with a new kind of peace, as if he'd finally made peace with every version of himself that came before. Maggie, meanwhile, continued her rise, collaborating with other young country talents, writing about authenticity, and proving that silence can sometimes say more than 1,000 interviews ever could. Their names may have been tied together by chance, but their journeys became mirrors of the same truth. You can't control what people believe, only how you carry your truth through it. And in that truth, both of them found grace, not as victims, not as villains, but as artists who let life teach them its hardest melody. And in that stillness, both seemed to finally hear it, the quiet hum of peace after a long, loud song. So here's where the story ends, or maybe just begins again. Two artists, two paths, one shared reminder that fame may amplify your voice, but it's still your heart that writes the lyrics. Keith Urban's journey from heartbreak to harmony, wasn't about who stood beside him on stage. It was about learning to stand alone, gracefully. And Maggie Baugh's silence wasn't avoidance. It was evolution. She didn't respond to the noise because she was too busy creating her own sound. Together, intentionally or not, they reminded the world that real stories don't need press releases or perfect explanations. They just need honesty, lived one verse at a time. The rumors may fade, but the music, the raw human truth beneath it all, will keep playing long after the noise stops. Because every artist, at their core, is just trying to turn their scars into songs. But even as the story seemed to settle, one truth kept echoing. Silence is never really silent in the world of fame. Every pause, every lyric, every glance on stage carries weight. Fans replay moments, dissect interviews, and search for meaning in every note sung. Yet maybe that's what keeps us all connected to these stories that need to understand what lies behind the spotlight. For Keith Urban, that silence wasn't avoidance. It was his way of rewriting his narrative without saying a word. His art had always been autobiographical, only now it was stripped of glamour and pretense. The performances weren't just shows, they were open letters written in melody. And as he strummed his guitar under the warm glow of stage lights, it felt like he wasn't just performing for the crowd, he was performing for his own redemption. Maggie Baugh, on the other hand, stood on a different stage, younger, hungrier, and right at the intersection between admiration and accusation. To many, she became a mystery, a name whispered across forums and gossip columns. Yet through it all, she never confirmed, never denied, just created. Her silence was a message in itself. Sometimes, dignity speaks louder than defense. Her song, The Devil Win, now resonates differently. The haunting lyric, "Tempting as it is, I won't let the devil win," wasn't just about temptation. It was about the pull of perception. The devil in this case could have been anything: fame, rumor, heartbreak, or even the dark side of success itself. She refused to let it consume her. Instead, she turned it into something that millions could feel, but few could fully understand. And maybe that's where the beauty of this story lies, in what remains unsaid. Because for every fan analyzing lyrics or rewatching that Chicago performance, there's an equal part of the story that lives in the gray area, the place where truth and interpretation meet. Keith Urban and Maggie Baugh's connection, whatever its true nature, became something symbolic. Not of scandal, but of the fragile line between mentorship and meaning, between music and misunderstanding. Two artists caught in the same fire, choosing not to fight the flames, but to find light within them. Even as the media moved on to the next big headline, fans still lingered in the echo, asking not what happened, but why it mattered. Because at its core, this wasn't just a story about country music or celebrity heartbreak. It was a story about people, imperfect, searching, evolving people who happened to be living their growth in front of millions. The beauty of it all? Neither of them ever tried to control the story. They let the music do that. And that's what separates performers from artists. Performers speak to you, but artists speak through you. So maybe the real message was never about a relationship, or a divorce, or a song. Maybe it was about resilience, about learning to keep playing, even when life changes the chords. And now, as you reach the end of this story, we'd love to hear from you. What do you think this whole chapter truly meant? A sign of new beginnings, a misunderstood friendship, or simply the natural rhythm of change? Comment below, because every listener hears a different song, and your perspective might just be the next verse of this story.